Commander Ellen Rowe arrived late, as always. But this time, it wasn't a tactic. It was a preference. The grand hall of Gallows Spire glittered with the pompous sterility of civilizations that had never known failure. Bioluminescent banners, rippled without wind, monarchs hovered in chromatic gravity thrones, and a chorus of antennaed diplomats hummed in perfect pitch. Into this carefully staged ballet of cosmic arrogance walked a human in a navy blue diplomatic coat, sipping coffee like she was attending a PTA meeting, flanked by two others who looked like they were either bored or casing the room. Dr. Hal. Vern was chewing on an energy bar he'd hidden in his sleeve, again, and Captain Myra Jane scanned the ceiling with an expressionless face that suggested she'd already found every entry point and a dozen exit plans. The hush that fell over the hall wasn't admiration. It was confusion. Humanity was late, underdressed, and audibly sipping. And yet, no one laughed. Then came the insult. Emperor Grohl Varix of the Zevran Concord, a towering serpentine monarch, clad in ancestral armor plated with galaxy-spanning condescension, rose from his throne and addressed Earth's envoy. "You're kind," he boomed. "Dresses as if culture is something you dig up and spill on yourselves." His voice echoed, ancient and amused. "We allow you this stage as charity, not as peers." Ellen blinked once, set her mug down on the nearest crystalline pedestal like it was a coaster. Then she walked forward and slapped the Emperor right across the shimmering ridge of his ceremonial crest. The sound rang like a temple bell across the chamber. One ambassador gasped, another dropped their translation orb. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a neutral delegate burst into a coughing fit that sounded suspiciously like laughter. For the Zevran, the slap was a formal challenge of dominance, only issued by nobility or higher, the unspoken truth. Ellen had just elevated herself above the Emperor on his own cultural terms. She smiled politely. "Forgive me," she said. "I thought I saw a glitch in the hierarchy." The hall stood frozen, as though the galaxy itself had forgotten how to breathe. Captain Jane didn't move, but her eyes twitched. 3 new threats marked, catalogued, neutralized. Hal leaned toward Ellen and muttered, "Tell me we practiced that line." "We didn't," she murmured back. "That's why it worked." Within seconds, the act had been recorded by over 100 species. By minute 3, it had been translated into 87 dialects. By minute 7, it was the top trending diplomatic event in 3 star clusters. What should have sparked war instead triggered something far more dangerous: recalibration. Earth's threat matrix, once listed somewhere near mild fungal nuisance, suddenly bloomed across prediction models like a plague of logic. Analysts in the Frey ascendancy updated their probability maps. The Yernak chorus filed emergency votes. One neutral merchant house quietly ordered human-style attire for its entire delegation. Ellen stood there, calm, patient, not smiling, not anymore. She hadn't come to declare war. She had come to clarify Earth's role in the galactic order. Not disruptive, not aggressive, just observant. And tonight, it observed that tradition had no defense against audacity. "Consider this a friendly nudge," she said, her voice low and crisp. "We're not here to dominate. We're here to participate, but we do have standards." Then she picked up her coffee, took a long sip, and turned her back on the Emperor, another cultural offense. Silence. A long, awkward silence that spread like a data breach. Ellen could feel it radiating, the algorithms recalculating, the alliances blinking nervously, the scent of ozone that meant someone somewhere was charging energy weapons and reconsidering. Myra Jane spoke for the first time. "He's not going to forget that." "Good," Ellen replied. "Neither will the galaxy." Behind her, the Zevran throne flickered as Grohl Varix sat, slowly, stiffly, his pride burning hotter than his ceremonial plasma core. For the first time in centuries, the Emperor had no pre-written response. Earth had stepped onto the galactic stage and, without firing a shot, without raising a flag, changed the direction of fear, not with force, with timing and the whisper of an open palm that said, "We see you." The slap heard across the stars wasn't just rebellion. It was a signal. Earth had arrived, and it had done its homework. By the time the slap's resonance died out across the hyperspace relays, panic had already begun to metastasize in corners of the galaxy where Earth had once been nothing more than a statistical placeholder. Now the so-called civil diplomatic species were scrambling to rewrite their contingency plans to account for a threat that didn't fit any of their inherited threat matrices. In the domed war hall of the Frey Ascendancy, a sterile chamber of logic-bound AI who once prided themselves on the purity of emotional detachment, a dozen thought nodes recompiled themselves mid-cycle, unable to process how a species capable of irony could assert dominance through ritual violation and be applauded for it. At the Neutral Union's trade nexus, 3 merchant kings stopped a high-stakes auction mid-bid to urgently discuss human behavioral volatility charts, which had gone from mildly eccentric to strategically erratic with mimetic implications. Meanwhile, in the sealed command deck of the Zevran Concorde, Emperor Groll Varix sat silent, nursing the burn across his regal crest, reviewing the footage with the same look one might reserve for a prophecy they thought would never come true. And Earth? Earth did what Earth always did. It smiled and said nothing, publicly. Privately, inside the modest Terran diplomatic vessel docked at the moon ring of Galor's spire, Ellen Rowe stood in front of a holoscreen displaying a spiderweb of psychological and cultural profiles. Each node pulsed with faint red indicators. Axis, tendencies files compiled over the last decade by Earth's covert observatories scattered throughout supposedly impenetrable galactic regimes, weaknesses, traditions, neuroses. "We're not fighting an empire," she told Hal and Myra. "We're unraveling their self-image." Hal, buried under 3 layers of crumbs from contraband Terran protein bars, looked up with mock horror. "So we're basically weaponizing their egos. Subtle." He took another bite. "How very us." Myra didn't speak, but she slid a datapad toward Ellen, encrypted feeds from Zevran intelligence that had been sliced open by WhisperNet, the dormant protocol Earth had installed inside common diplomatic relays decades ago under the guise of universal translation enhancements. Ellen scanned the files. "They're calling the slap an act of ancestral sabotage," she murmured. "Half of them think it's a challenge for political dominance. The other half think it's a mating ritual." Hal blinked. "Please, for the love of neural continuity, tell me we didn't just flirt with an emperor." Ellen's lip curled in the faintest smile. "Depends how desperate he is." Across the stars, the slap continued to ripple. Simulation clusters predicted war, diplomatic collapse, or spontaneous regime shifts. But none predicted what came next. Earth's calculated silence. No apologies, no clarifications. Just the lingering threat of understanding too much. By the end of the second galactic cycle, 33 species had updated their first contact protocols. 17 began internal reviews of ancient customs for potential psychological exposure points. 6 recalled their ambassadors to retrain for exposure to emotionally asymmetrical dialogue. And on the private comms of elite security councils, one phrase began surfacing with increasing dread. They brought no weapons, just context. On day 4, Earth released a short statement. Humanity respects all cultures. Some require adjustment. It ended with a smiley face emoji, promptly dissected by 3 interstellar think tanks for coded meaning. But the real play happened far from the public eye. The Tarn Axis Summit had been proposed as a neutral ground, a recalibration point for the diplomatic community to address Terran aggression. In truth, it was a trap. Intelligence acquired through WhisperNet revealed the summit station had been subtly modified with a failsafe, an embedded core destabilizer that would detonate on diplomatic breach, conveniently timed with Earth's scheduled presence. The resulting catastrophe would erase Earth's delegation and frame it as an unstable threat. Too clever, too old school, too late. The moment Ellen stepped onto the station, she began timing every breath. Within 12 minutes, she located the control nodes, extracted the fail code embedded in the pseudo-neutral quorums system, and uploaded a counter protocol. She didn't disarm the bomb. She rewrote the permissions. Then, halfway through the summit's opening address, as a self-righteous Arvak diplomat began a thinly veiled condemnation of humanity's lack of decorum befitting sentient participation, Ellen interrupted. "Before we continue, I'd like to offer a gentle reminder," she said, tapping her pad. The room dimmed as every console in the hall flickered to a new screen, each displaying one chilling sentence: authorization invalid. Command channel rerouted, Terran secure. Then she dropped the real line. "If any of you intend to push that button today, just know you'll be deleting your own diplomatic archives, fleet schedules, and system-wide backups. Oh, and your universal dating apps. Sorry, Frey Ascendancy." Gasps. Stillness. Myra crossed her arms without a word. Hal leaned forward, hands folded. "We didn't come with weapons," he said casually. "We came with receipts." For 10 seconds, no one moved. Ellen let the moment breathe, watched as fear took a new form, not of death or violence, but of being understood so thoroughly that survival depended on compliance. One ambassador whispered, "You turned diplomacy into a virus." Ellen corrected gently, "No, we just made it smarter." The station didn't explode. No formal declarations were made. But when the summit ended, no one spoke to each other, without scanning their consoles first. Earth hadn't brought a war. It had brought something worse: clarity. The third summit was supposed to be a turning point, a last, desperate attempt to cage the Terran phenomenon in the velvet language of old diplomacy. Held on the Tarn axis again, this time under reinforced security and veiled under layers of bureaucratic neutrality, the gathering was pitched as a binding realignment forum. In practice, it was a cornering. Dozens of alien empires gathered, with a single goal: isolate Earth, outvote its influence, and quietly remind the younger species of its place. But no one told Ellen Rowe, or perhaps they had, and she'd simply smiled and made note of who'd blinked when she sipped her coffee. She arrived late again, not for theatrical effect this time, but because her ship had deliberately looped through the Veil cluster, a bypass maneuver that exposed the encrypted relays of no less than 5 major powers. That data now sat quietly in the secure pocket of her wristpad. The Terran delegation entered without fanfare, dressed not in ceremonial robes or shimmering garb, but in simple, formal black, like the embodiment of a pause in a sentence no one wanted to finish. Captain Myra Jane stood to Ellen's right, impassive, and unreadable as always, while Hal Verne walked beside them, muttering to himself, chewing a dried fruit bar with the energy of someone facing execution, but too annoyed to skip breakfast. The hall's air had changed. Less pomp, more dread. The delegates nodded with forced courtesy, but their eyes darted like prey tracking a new kind of predator. These weren't warriors. They were pattern breakers. Diplomats with too much information and no reverence for inherited power. Ellen took her seat at the long crescent table, adjusted her mug, and waited for the performance to begin. The Zevran. Envoy opened with a syrupy voice, calling for appropriate re-establishment of hierarchical dignity. Translation: apologize for the slap, or we declare war by passive-aggressive paperwork. Other empires followed with similarly veiled threats: reassessment of Terran privileges, suspension of minor trade conduits, sanctions under the Galactic Behavioral Clause 17C. Ellen listened in silence, her eyes scanning the room but her fingers flicking through layers of security access behind her cup. Then came the pitch. A motion to revoke Earth's inclusion in the Spire Alliance Accords. It required unanimous support. All eyes turned to the final vote. Ambassador Vec of the Neutral Union, a mercantile diplomat who had grown fantastically wealthy selling human-themed luxury packs, since the slap incident had made Earth weirdly fashionable. Vec paused. His hand hovered. Then he smiled and withdrew the vote. "We believe Earth's unpredictability has profitable potential," he said, blinking all four eyes independently. The room erupted in muffled outrage. Ellen smiled. Not because they had won, but because now everyone knew they weren't playing the same game. The true strike came minutes later. As the delegates began shouting about vote manipulation and trade treachery, the lights flickered. Holograms froze. An alarm sounded, low, pulsing, unfamiliar. Every interface in the room simultaneously displayed a single line. Tarn Axis Detonation Protocol activated. Panic surged. Delegates leapt from seats. Guards drew weapons. The walls shimmered with fail-safe shields. "Override it!" shouted someone from the fray side. "Who triggered this?" "Earth!" barked a Zevran admiral, already raising a call to fleet command. But before he could speak, the room's master systems locked him out. A voice played across every channel. Calm. Familiar. Ellen Rowe. "Relax," she said. "You're not going to die. That would be inefficient." Silence fell. "What you're experiencing is a simulation, initiated through your own failsafes. We embedded a redundant shell override inside WhisperNet 6 years ago, triggered by a unanimous threat posture directed at Earth. Thank you for confirming your bias." Murmurs turned into horror. Delegates stared at their consoles, unable to access anything. "In the event of true hostility," Ellen continued, "Earth doesn't respond. It preempts, not with force, with erasure, political, cultural, economic." Hal chimed in through a back channel, voice dry as oxygen scrubbers. "Your systems were never hacked. You just assumed no one would bother reading your own terms and conditions." Myra stared down an neutral bodyguard until he put his weapon away without a word. Ellen stood slowly, letting the silence stretch like tension wire. "We're not here to conquer you," she said, voice measured, barely above a whisper. "We're here to make you afraid of what we don't say." And just like that, the lights returned. The consoles blinked back to normal. The panic cooled, but something fundamental had cracked in the foundation of galactic order. Not because Earth could kill them, but because Earth had the restraint not to, and made sure everyone knew it. Delegates shuffled from the hall like survivors of a ghost ship, mumbling about protocols and plausible deniability. The summit concluded without signatures, without war, and without resolution. But no one would ever invite Earth into a trap again, because traps required ignorance. And Earth? Earth had been watching the whole time. The final summit convened not in a council chamber or ceremonial spire, but in the ancient vault city of Omrev, a hollowed monument embedded in the burning shell of a dying star, long thought lost to collapse, until Earth requested it as neutral ground. The request alone had sent ripples through the galactic elite. No one asked for Omrev. You didn't suggest hosting a political summit inside a star unless you were insane or terrifyingly confident. Yet Earth had made the demand with typical politeness and a smile that offered no explanation. And so, beneath, molten walls that shimmered like frozen time and gravitational tides that required neurospine stabilizers just to stand upright, the oldest and most powerful empires gathered for what they believed would be the final reckoning. The Terran delegation did not arrive in its own ships. It arrived escorted by 12 warships, not human, but belonging to terrified former rivals now quietly aligned behind Earth's enigmatic consistency. Vessels from the Utral, the Frey, even a Yernak heavy-mined barge, which had previously declared Earth existentially annoying, now hovered like ceremonial guards outside the city's orbit, broadcasting passive protection codes keyed to Commander Ellen Rowe's biosignature. Inside the obsidian halls of Omrev, she walked alone into the summit chamber, wearing no armor, no weapons, and no entourage, Her presence didn't fill the room, it fractured it. Delegates whispered, recalibrated postures, rehearsed ancient defenses against oratory strikes that no longer worked. The Zevran Emperor himself had returned, though the brilliant crest she once slapped now bore a faint geometric etching, a mark of formal dishonor in his culture, made permanent not by his choice, but by public demand for penance. His gaze tracked her with haunted fury, but he spoke nothing. This time, Ellen didn't wait for opening remarks. She strode to the center of the dais, activated a field node, and uploaded a singular data cube marked Recall Event, Echo Contingency. The lights dimmed, the chamber sealed, and every delegate's private neural link, those thought untraceable, was force-fed a history, not a threat, not blackmail, just the truth, unfiltered, unembellished, and arranged chronologically, a curated record of every betrayal Earth had endured since its inclusion in galactic society, from denied trade licenses to sabotaged research missions, manipulated treaties, smear campaigns, covert assassination attempts, all neatly time-stamped, cross-referenced, and footnoted with source tags from the perpetrator's own archives, retrieved via WhisperNet with meticulous surgical precision. There was no narration, no accusation, only the silence of knowing they'd been watched the entire time, and that Earth had chosen not to retaliate, until now. When the feed ended, there was no applause, no outrage, just stillness. Ellen stood in that hush like a ghost from a future no one wanted to meet. "We endured," she said finally, her voice low, calm, echoing through the ancient core like gravity itself. "We adapted. We outgrew you, and you mistook our silence for submission." She stepped forward, eyes scanning the shattered hierarchy before her. "You measure power in fleets, in lineage, in ritual. We measure it in understanding, and patience, and timing. And now, it's time." One brave delegate, a crystalline hybrid from the Liston Combine, rasped, "What do you want?" Ellen tilted her head slightly, as if the question were quaint. "We don't want your crowns," she replied. "We want your rules." She tapped her wrist pad. A dozen treaty proposals deployed simultaneously into the delegates' personal interfaces, each one redrafted with Earth's new amendments. No threats, just revisions, removal of supremacy clauses, mandatory cultural transparency audits, equitable trade conduits, shared archive access to ancestral data for all post-contact civilizations. In other words, evolution, fairness, the thing they all feared most. Myra Jane appeared silently at Ellen's side, as if materializing from the architecture itself. Hal joined moments later, a half-crushed snack bar still in his hand. "Is this the part where we ask nicely?" he murmured. Ellen didn't smile. She simply turned to the room. "Sign them, or don't. But understand, if Earth walks away now, it will not be in protest. It will be in preparation. And the next time we speak, it won't be through emissaries." One by one they capitulated. Not because they were conquered, but because they'd been seen, stripped bare by a species that didn't burn worlds, but rewrote atmospheres. By a woman who sipped coffee while rearranging power dynamics built over millennia. When it was over, the new order wasn't declared with fanfare or ceremony. It was acknowledged in a single shared silence, as binding as any law ever written. As Ellen Rowe exited Omrev, the molten light of the dying star cast her shadow long across the glassy corridor. And behind her, the galaxy finally understood. Earth never needed to conquer. It only needed to be underestimated, just long enough to learn how to rewrite the ending.